The hum was my constant companion. It lived in the walls of the observatory, a low, thrumming whisper of machinery, of distant data processing, of the universe itself being sifted and catalogued. For years, it had been the soundtrack to my solitude, a rhythm I understood better than my own pulse. My world was here, in the cool, dry air of the control room, amidst the banks of monitors that painted the cosmos in shades of green and blue, the scent of ozone and old paper clinging to everything. I, Marcus, found a peculiar comfort in the precision, the predictable ebb and flow of cosmic noise. Tonight, the silence between the hums felt heavier. Nothing of note was expected. My fingers, accustomed to the worn textures of the keyboard, moved with practiced ease across the keys, adjusting filters, refining parameters. The screen before me displayed a familiar chaos of background radiation, a shimmering static that was, in its own way, beautiful. I took a sip of the lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste a familiar anchor in the long night. Then it appeared. A blip, faint but distinct on a secondary spectrum analyzer tucked away in the corner of my vision. It wasn't the random spike of cosmic rays, nor the signature of a distant pulsar. This was different. I leaned closer, my breath catching in my throat. The line on the graph was too sharp, too deliberate. It was a single, perfect peak where there should have been only the gentle undulations of noise. I felt my pulse hammer against my ribs, a sudden, unwelcome intrusion into the quiet order. I rerouted the feed, isolating the anomaly. The hum of the machine seemed to deepen, a subtle shift in pitch that only I, after years spent in this room, would notice. On the main monitor, the waveform solidified. It wasn't a random burst. It was a pattern, a series of pulses, each equidistant, each identical in amplitude. This was impossible. Hours bled into each other. The faint scent of copper seemed to cling to the air, or perhaps it was just my own heightened senses playing tricks. My eyes burned, but I couldn't tear them away from the screen. I ran every diagnostic, every verification protocol I knew. I cross-referenced with every known astronomical catalog, every theoretical possibility. The signal remained. It was structured. It was deliberate, and it was coming from a region of space where no known matter, no energy source, no thing should be capable of producing such a precise emission. The sheer mathematical elegance of its periodicity was unnerving. It was a rhythm, a beat, emanating from absolute nothingness. My fingers, usually so precise, trembled slightly as I pulled up the spectral analysis. No Doppler shift, no distortion, no degradation. It was as if it had just begun its journey, but the distance, the sheer, unimaginable distance implied an antiquity that defied comprehension. What kind of power, what kind of intention could send such a message? The thought twisted in my gut. My meticulous world, built on observable laws and predictable physics, was suddenly a house of cards. This signal, if real, wasn't just a discovery. It was a contradiction. It was a violation. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket, the rough canvas cool against my skin, and left the control room, the door hissing shut behind me. I drove aimlessly, the tires crunching on the gravel track leading away from the remote facility. The night air was sharp, carrying the faint, sweet smell of damp earth and something else, something vaguely metallic that I couldn't place. My mind reeled with the implications. It was the antithesis of everything I understood about entropy, about the slow, chaotic decay of the universe. It was order imposed on the ultimate disorder. A sprawling expanse of empty fields, now cluttered with the skeletal remains of temporary structures. Ferris wheel gondolas hung limp and silent, roller coaster tracks glinted dully under the sparse moonlight. The air here was still, thick with the scent of popcorn oil and cheap cotton candy, ghosts of future festivities. It was a county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present. The contrast was stark. The infinite, terrifying order of the signal versus this temporary, fleeting human chaos. It was a jarring reminder of a world that continued, oblivious to the impossible truth I had just unearthed. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hoot of an owl. I looked up at the star-dusted sky, the same sky that had, moments ago, delivered its impossible message. What did it want? What did it mean? And how could something so perfectly ordered exist in a universe that was constantly striving for chaos? My pulse now felt erratic, a frantic counterpoint to the signal's steady, impassable beat. I saw the signal everywhere. It scrolled across my monitors in shimmering waves, a fractal dance of numbers and symbols that defied classification. My fingers, raw and aching, hovered over the keyboard, cycling through algorithms, cross-referencing against every known language, every mathematical constant, every astrophysical phenomenon. Dust motes, illuminated by the cold glow of the screens, swam in the stale air of my workspace, oblivious to the profound, unsettling truth unfolding before me. The scent of ozone and stale coffee clung to everything, a testament to my tireless vigil. Hours bled into days. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, a weakness I refused. My eyes burned, but I couldn't look away from the patterns. They weren't random. They weren't noise. They possessed a terrifying elegance, a complexity that hinted at a logic so alien, so vast, it made the most advanced human mathematics seem like a child's scrawl. Each sequence seemed to fold back on itself, creating new layers of meaning, new dimensions of information that shouldn't exist within a linear stream. It was like trying to read a book where every word was also a sentence, and every sentence was also the entire library. What kind of mind could conceive such a thing? My stomach gnawed at me, a dull ache I mostly ignored. The few times I did eat, the food tasted like ash, metallic and distant. I felt its vibrations deep in my bones, a low-frequency hum that resonated with something primal, something forgotten. It wasn't just data anymore. It was an intrusion. A colleague called, his voice a jarring intrusion from a world I no longer inhabited. "Marcus, you haven't checked in." I mumbled something about a breakthrough, about needing more time. Her concern was a distant echo, like a radio signal from another galaxy. She mentioned needing to step away to clear my head. A walk, she suggested. Fresh air. The words tasted foreign on my tongue. The signal was not merely complex. It was designed to be beyond comprehension, yet it also seemed to invite it. Was it a trap? My mind, however, needed a different kind of pattern recognition, a different kind of input. I needed to escape the hum, if only for a few minutes. I drove, the car feeling like a foreign object, my body a puppet. The late afternoon light was thin, stretched across the landscape. I found myself on the outskirts of town, drawn by the skeletal structures rising against the twilight sky. It was the county fair setup. Opening tomorrow, no workers present. The air here was different. Not the sterile, ozone-laced air of the observatory, but a damp, earthy scent mixed with the ghost of fried dough and cotton candy. The Ferris wheel stood motionless, a giant, rusted skeleton against the bruised purple of the horizon. Empty stalls, their canvas flaps tied down, looked like gaping mouths. The rides, garishly painted in primary colors, were silent, their intricate mechanisms frozen. No music, no laughter, no chatter. Just the wind, whistling through the empty spaces, carrying a faint, unsettling echo of what was to come. I walked among the silent attractions, my boots crunching on loose gravel. A carousel, its painted horses rearing in eternal gallop, was draped in a tarp, giving it the appearance of a monstrous, sleeping creature. The ground was uneven, churned up by heavy machinery. This world, with its temporary joys and predictable rhythms, felt like a fragile illusion. A banner, half unfurled, flapped against a pole, revealing a faded image of a grinning clown. Its painted smile seemed too wide, its eyes too vacant. The signal was not merely communicating, it was asserting. It wasn't asking for understanding, it was demanding it, or perhaps imposing it. What if the patterns weren't just data, but instructions? Instructions for what? The observatory's hum still vibrated in my bones, even miles away, even with the engine's growl a dull counterpoint to the night. It was a phantom thrumming, a resonance that had seeped into me, a reminder of the impossible patterns I'd unearthed. My charts, once a testament to cold, hard science, now felt like divinations. They spoke of something that should not be, something that defied every law I knew, every constant the universe supposedly held. Science had failed me. Or, more accurately, science had led me to the edge of its own comprehension and then pushed me over. That's why I was driving. The names of forgotten scholars, of collectors of the esoteric, had begun to surface in my late-night searches, whispered fragments in the dark corners of academic forums. The air through the cracked window tasted of wet earth and distant diesel. The road eventually narrowed, winding past a vast, open field. My headlights cut across a strange landscape. The skeletal ribs of half-erected tents, the silent, looming silhouettes of rides wrapped in plastic sheeting. This was the county fair setup. Opening tomorrow, no workers present. It was a ghost town of impending festivity, a mockery of joy in the pre-dawn gloom. Canvas flapped softly in the breeze, a series of muffled sighs. I saw the empty ticket booths, the vacant spaces where laughter and the smell of fried dough would soon explode. Now only a profound stillness reigned, punctuated by the occasional clatter of loose metal, a sound without source. It felt like walking through a dream that had forgotten its purpose. Why was I here? What could this place offer? I killed the engine. I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my boots, a sound that felt too loud. The air here was thicker, carrying the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and something else, a faint, almost imperceptible mustiness, like old paper. My pulse hammered against my ribs. I knocked. The wood felt ancient beneath my knuckles, dry and rough. No answer. I knocked again, harder. A light flickered on inside, a sickly yellow glow that barely pierced the dusty glass. I explained my purpose, my desperate search for unconventional interpretations of ancient celestial phenomena, a euphemism for the unspeakable. The collector, a gaunt man whose eyes held the weary glint of someone who had seen too much, regarded me with suspicion, then perhaps a flicker of recognition. He stepped aside. The interior was a labyrinth of forgotten things. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of volumes bound in cracked leather and faded cloth. Tables were piled high with strange artifacts, tarnished bronzes, petrified wood, maps yellowed to illegibility. The air was heavy with the scent of dust, aged paper, and something metallic, like forgotten coins. Every surface was a testament to time, to the slow, relentless erosion of memory. I ran a hand over a shelf, the wood rough and splintered. "You speak of patterns," the collector rasped, his eyes fixed on me. "Of order where there should be chaos, of a language no living tongue remembers." He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his fingers tracing the spine of a book before pulling it free. The pages within were thin, translucent, covered in meticulous, angular script and diagrams that seemed to writhe on the page. A copy of a copy, from a time when the sky was a different map. I leaned closer, my breath catching. The diagrams were intricate, sprawling, unlike any astronomical chart I had ever seen. They depicted constellations, yes, but not ones I recognized. And woven through them, connecting the stars, were impassable geometric forms. They were complex, yet unnervingly regular, a series of nested structures that seemed to define the very space between the celestial bodies. My mind, trained to find order, instantly began to make comparisons. The angularity, the impassable scale, the repeating non-Euclidean symmetries. It was all there, mirrored in the incomprehensible signal that haunted my observatory. One diagram in particular seized my attention. Everything. The description next to it, translated by the collector in his dry, academic tone, spoke of the unraveler, a primal architecture that corrects the errors of creation. It spoke of a consciousness so vast, so ancient, that it perceived the very laws of physics as temporary, flawed constructs. My stomach twisted. The signal, the structures, the patterns I'd meticulously catalogued for months. They weren't just data points. They were a map, a blueprint, a warning. This wasn't some lost human myth. It was a memory of something truly ancient, something that had been watching, waiting, for longer than humanity had even dreamt of existing. My fingers trembled as I traced one of the impassable lines on the page. What was the unraveler? And what did it mean to correct the errors of creation? The diagrams lay spread across my desk, a constellation of impassable forms. My gaze drifted over them, tracing lines that should not connect, stars that should not exist in such configurations. The ink, though merely carbon on paper, seemed to hum, vibrating with a knowledge that resonated deep within my skull. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a dull throb that had become a constant companion since the signal first pierced the void. I pushed back from the desk, standing to stretch. My coffee mug, half empty, sat on the edge of the table. I remembered placing it firmly on the coaster, but now it was on the bare wood, leaving a faint ring, a small thing, a trick of memory perhaps. I picked it up, the ceramic cool against my fingers, and returned it to its proper place. The air in the room felt heavy, still, carrying the faint, sweet scent of old paper and something else, something metallic and sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. As I turned to face the window, my reflection stared back from the darkened glass. For a fleeting instant, the lines of the window frame behind my image seemed to bend, forming an acute angle where only 90 degrees should have been. A brief, impassable geometry, a blink-and-you-miss-it distortion that made my stomach clench. I rubbed my eyes, the grit of exhaustion under my eyelids. Just tired, Marcus. The thought was a comfort, thin as tissue. Sleep offered no true respite. I slipped into it, heavy and unwilling, the diagram still burning behind my closed eyes. The dreams were no longer vague anxieties. They were structured now, vibrant, invasive. I was drifting in an ocean of pure, impassable color hues that defied the spectrum, shifting and merging in ways that made my inner ear ache. There was a sound, too, a low thrumming, like a colossal engine buried deep beneath the earth, vibrating through my very bones. I felt a presence, vast and indifferent, pressing down on me, not with weight, but with an overwhelming concept of being. My limbs felt heavy, useless. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. The colors pulsed. The thrumming intensified. I woke with a gasp, my body rigid. Sheets tangled around my legs. Sweat plastered my hair to my forehead. My throat was dry, and a bitter metallic taste coated my tongue. The dream clung to me, a residue of profound unease, not fading like a normal dream, but lingering with the vividness of a recent memory. My skin prickled, aware. The sun was barely a rumor on the horizon when I left the apartment. The city was quiet, the air cool and damp, carrying the faint, sweet smell of dew on grass. My mind felt like a frayed wire, buzzing with residual static. I walked aimlessly, letting my feet carry me through the waking streets until I found myself on the edge of town, where the suburban sprawl gave way to open fields. There it was, the county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present. A sprawling collection of tents, dormant rides, and empty concession stands. It was an odd place to find myself, but the quiet solitude appealed to the raw nerve endings of my mind. I pushed open a flimsy chain-link gate that hung ajar and stepped inside. The ground was uneven, churned earth and scattered wood chips. I wandered deeper, past the skeletal frames of what would soon be game booths. The air smelled of canvas, stale popcorn, and something faintly chemical, like grease and disinfectant. A row of carousel animals stood draped in tarpaulins, their forms distorted and ghostly. I peered closer at a clown face painted on a boarded-up dunk tank. The grin, wide and manic, seemed to stretch just a little too far, the eyes following me with an unnerving intensity. I blinked. It was just a painting. Yet the proportions seemed subtly wrong, the perspective off in a way I couldn't quite articulate. My breath hitched. Further on, a massive tent, meant for livestock or prize exhibits, dominated the landscape. Its canvas walls billowed slightly in the faint breeze, but as I approached, the structure itself seemed to defy logic. It was a physical impossibility, a space that existed in defiance of 3 dimensions. My vision blurred at the edges. Nausea twisted through me. I reached out a hand, feeling the rough canvas beneath my fingertips. It was solid, real, but the shape was wrong. How could something look right but be so profoundly wrong? And what was happening to me? The ink, though merely carbon on paper, seemed to hum, vibrating with a knowledge that resonated deep within me, a terrifying echo. The signal had changed everything. It had opened a door I now desperately needed someone else to look through. My only lead was a name whispered years ago by a former colleague, a disgraced academic who had vanished after publishing theories so outlandish they'd been laughed out of every institution. I had no choice. I found the address scrawled on an old, forgotten forum, a series of directions that led me far from the city, down winding rural roads. The sky, a bruised purple, pressed low as I pulled onto a gravel path marked by a faded, hand-painted sign, future site of annual county fair. Ahead, a sprawling, skeletal landscape emerged from the gloom. My tires crunched over loose stones. The air carried a faint, sweet smell of damp earth and something vaguely metallic, like old machinery left to rust. Canvas tarps, stretched taut over half-built stalls, billowed softly in a breeze that carried no warmth. Rides stood like dormant giants, their brightly painted metal glinting dully, skeletal arms reaching towards the encroaching night. A Ferris wheel, half-assembled, loomed over everything, its empty seats swaying with a faint, mournful squeak. The silence here was not peaceful. It was a heavy, watchful thing that pressed in on my ears. My headlights cut through the gloom, picking out a battered travel trailer tucked away behind a stack of lumber and a forgotten cotton candy machine. A single, weak light glowed from its window, casting a sickly yellow rectangle onto the dry grass. I cut the engine. The sudden absence of sound was jarring. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, laced now with the faint, sharp scent of ozone. A shiver, not entirely from the temperature, traced a path up my spine. I knocked on the trailer door. After a long moment, the light inside flickered, then brightened. The door groaned open a crack. One eye, bloodshot and wide, peered out at me. Then the door opened wider, revealing a figure swallowed by a threadbare robe, hair a wild halo of white. The former academic was thinner than I remembered from old photographs, their face a roadmap of deep lines, etched with something beyond mere age. Their skin was pale, almost translucent. The air that escaped the trailer carried the stale scent of old paper and something else, something acrid and unfamiliar like burnt sugar and dust. "Ire Marcus," the former academic rasped, their voice like gravel. They didn't ask how I knew them or why I was there. They simply knew my name. I found it, didn't I, the pattern? Their gaze, when it met mine, was too intense, too knowing. It felt as if they saw not just me, but the impassable diagrams still burning in my mind. I felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to run, to leave this place and the knowing eyes behind. But the signal, the diagrams, they had driven me here. I found a signal. I managed, my voice rough. Structured, ancient, The trailer's interior was a cramped, chaotic nest of books, papers, and strange, hand-drawn charts tacked to every available surface. The air was thick and heavy, pressing down on me. I saw symbols on the charts that mirrored the impassable configurations from my own data, lines and shapes I'd believed unique to my discovery. My stomach tightened. "They are not just signals, Marcus," the former academic said, their voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. They pulled a tattered book from a precarious stack, its binding cracked, its pages brittle with age. "They are invitations, blueprints. They are the skin of something vast, something that dreams of correction, and your signal, it's a waking thought." My mouth felt dry. The words, chorus of unmaking, felt like a physical blow. It was an abstract concept, a poetic horror. Our reality, Marcus, is a flawed equation, a temporary anomaly in the chorus. It hums the true form, the true emptiness. A faint smile, devoid of joy, touched their lips. I haven't just detected a signal. I've answered a call, and they heard I. The trailer seemed to shrink around me. The smell of old paper and ozone became suffocating. My hands trembled. The vastness of the cosmos, once a source of wonder, now felt like a predatory eye. The former academic sank onto a stool, their shoulders shaking with a silent, mirthless chuckle. They heard I, Marcus, and now they know where to look. I backed away slowly, my mind reeling. The county fair setup, just outside the thin walls of the trailer, felt less like a place of future joy and more like a stage for some monstrous impending performance. The silent rides, the flapping canvas, the eerie quiet, it all seemed to be waiting. What had I truly awakened? The county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present, loomed outside the trailer's thin walls. I backed away from the window, the image of those silent, inert rides etched behind my eyelids. The canvas tense, slack and flapping in a barely there breeze, looked like empty husks. The air out there felt heavy, charged not with anticipation, but with a waiting silence that pressed in on me, even through the glass. It wasn't the silence of peace, but of profound absence. My skin prickled. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching quiet. I needed to focus, to ground myself in the familiar hum of the equipment. The data. It was all about the data. I moved back to the console, my movements stiff, as if my joints had rusted. The small, cramped space of the trailer, usually a sanctuary of logic and reason, now felt like a fragile shell against something vast and unseen. The faint smell of stale coffee and ozone from the electronics was a comfort, a tether to the tangible. I slumped into the worn chair, forcing my gaze onto the screens. Lines of code, frequency modulations, amplitude shifts, it was all there. A digital tapestry of information, but something was different now. The algorithms I had designed to sift through cosmic background noise, to isolate and amplify, were struggling. They were finding structure where no natural phenomenon should exist, patterns within patterns, a fractal complexity that defied random generation. I isolated a specific sequence, a recurring motif that had begun to appear more frequently in the signal. It wasn't just mathematical. It had an internal rhythm, a cadence that resonated in a way I couldn't explain. I ran a new analysis, stripping away the noise, focusing on the underlying harmonics. The screens flickered, displaying waveforms that rose and fell with an unnerving regularity. It was like music, but not music I had ever heard. It was too vast, too ancient, too purposeful. This wasn't a natural emission. It wasn't a pulsar or a quasar or any known astrophysical phenomenon. This was crafted, deliberate. I felt a growing nausea twist through me as I began to recognize subtle shifts, inflections in the patterns that mimicked language. Not human language, not even a language based on sound or light as we understood it, but a language of pure information woven into the fabric of space-time itself. It was speaking. My breath hitched. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes burning. The patterns shifted again, coalescing into a more distinct sequence. It was a message, and as I watched, as my mind, starved for sleep and pushed to its limits, began to interpret the impossible, a terrifying realization bloomed in my chest. It felt, directed, at me. The specific algorithms I had built, the precise frequencies I had tuned, had somehow opened a channel. I felt a presence not physical, but an awareness that transcended distance and dimension. The song on the screen wasn't just a pattern. It was an intelligence, an ancient, patient consciousness, and it was acknowledging me. A wave of ice flooded my veins. What had I done? My quest for knowledge had inadvertently become an invitation. I saw flashes, not images, but concepts, impressions. The signal wasn't merely relaying information, it was conveying a perspective, an intention. It was a vision of existence unburdened by what it perceived as flaws. A universe without entropy. A reality without the messy, chaotic laws of physics that governed our fragile lives. It was showing me a vast, terrifying correction. My mind struggled to grasp the scale, the sheer audacity of such a purpose. It wasn't about destruction, not in the human sense. It was about reordering, about unmaking to remake. My hands trembled, hovering over the controls. The air tasted metallic, like fear. The entity's song wasn't just a communication, it was an indoctrination. It was showing me the truth of its existence, the grand design it intended to impose. And in that glimpse, I saw the insignificance of everything I knew, everything humanity held dear. Our reality was merely a temporary, flawed construct, awaiting its inevitable revision. The screen flickered, and a new, more intense sequence unfolded. This wasn't a fragment anymore. This was a direct declaration, an overwhelming cascade of information that bypassed my conscious thought and burrowed deep into my subconscious. It wasn't explaining, it was showing. And what it showed me was a universe stripped bare, fundamental forces rewritten, the very essence of matter and energy dissolved and reassembled according to an alien will. Our stars, our planets, our very forms all transient, all subject to this ultimate rectification. The silent county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present, now seemed to mirror the emptiness I felt inside. Those empty rides, those flapping tents, they were not waiting for joy, they were waiting for nothing. for the absence that would follow the entity's grand, horrifying design. What would be left when its song finally ended? The air outside felt hollow. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. I could still see the vast, empty expanse of the county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present, through the thin, grimy glass. It was too quiet. The absence of movement, the lack of any human presence, pressed against the flimsy walls of the trailer, a heavy, suffocating silence. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. A tremor ran through the floorboards. Just the wind, I told myself, a gust against the trailer's side. But the air inside was still, heavy with the scent of stale coffee and something else, something sharp and metallic, like old pennies. I glanced around the cramped space, my eyes darting to the stacked research papers, the blinking lights of the console, the half-eaten sandwich on a plate, all familiar yet suddenly alien. Each blink felt like a punch to my gut. Was it the generator, or was it something else, something reaching for the very light itself? I gripped the edge of the console, my grip tight, the plastic cool and slick under my palms. It wasn't coming from the console, nor from any machinery. It seemed to resonate from the very air, a vibration that tickled the back of my teeth, a sound felt more than heard. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it only intensified, a pressure building behind my eyes, a dull ache blooming in my forehead. The whine shifted subtly into something more complex, a discordant symphony of impossible frequencies, a sound that implied colors and shapes I couldn't perceive. It was the signal. It was here. My skin prickled, aware of every hair on my arms. Was I hearing it with my ears, or with something deeper, something in my marrow? The walls of the trailer seemed to ripple, the cheap wood paneling breathing in and out with a slow, deliberate rhythm. The posters tacked to the wall a faded map of the local star systems, a calendar marked with obsolete dates elongated, their edges blurring, the colors bleeding into each other like watercolors left in the rain. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea twisting through me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the distortion, but the image of the warping walls remained, burned onto the inside of my eyelids. When I opened them, the posters had returned to their normal state, crisp and still. But the metallic taste in my mouth was undeniable, a sharp tang of fear. Had it really happened, or was my mind finally fracturing? I stumbled towards the door, needing to escape the suffocating confines, needing to see if the outside world still held its shape. My hand fumbled with the latch, the cold metal biting into my fingertips. The wind outside had picked up, a low moan now, rustling the canvas tents of the county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present. Instead, it carried a faint, acrid smell, like ozone mixed with something ancient and decayed. My eyes scanned the vast, empty field. The Ferris wheel, a skeletal silhouette against the bruised twilight sky, began to turn. Slowly at first, then gaining speed, its empty carriages swinging, creaking, with no power source, no operator. The merry-go-round beside it shuddered, its painted horses rearing, frozen mid-gallop. But the entire structure began to spin, faster and faster, a blur of faded colors. The calliope music started then, a tinny, distorted melody that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a chaotic jumble of notes that grated on my nerves, echoing the impossible frequencies I'd heard earlier. It was a carnival of the damned, playing only for me. This wasn't just my mind playing tricks. This was a demonstration. The very laws of physics were unraveling, reality fraying at the edges, responding to an unseen conductor. Was the correction manifesting, a twisting of expected order into something profoundly, viscerally wrong, hollow. I could still see the vast, empty expanse of the county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present. My apartment was too quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant city drone, they felt like fragile sounds, easily shattered. I could still taste the bitter tang of old coffee, cold and metallic, on my tongue. I stared at the window again, not daring to get too close. The faint glow of the city lights, usually a comforting backdrop, now seemed feeble, distant. The fairground lay beneath a sky that felt too close, too heavy. The moon, usually a crisp disk, appeared slightly elongated, a distortion I tried to dismiss as optical illusion, tired eyes. But the Ferris wheel, its skeletal frame reaching into the bruised twilight, seemed to lean inward, its highest gondolas swaying with an impassable rhythm, too slow, too deliberate for any breeze. I closed my eyes, pressing the heels of my hands into them, trying to clear the vision. When I opened them, the moon was still misshapen. They writhed, not in any discernible pattern, not like branches in wind, but with an internal liquid motion. My breath caught again. A low thrum began, vibrating through the floorboards, up my legs, into my chest. It wasn't a sound, not really, more a sensation. A deep resonance that felt like it was coming from inside me or from the very ground beneath the building. The thrum intensified, making the glass in the window pane tremble. The vibration was real. It wasn't a truck, not an earthquake. It was too sustained, too deep. It felt like the world itself was being plucked like a string. My ears popped, a sudden pressure building in my sinuses, a dull ache behind my eyes. Then the lights began to flicker. Not just the street lights outside, but the fluorescent tubes in my own kitchen, the small lamp by my armchair. They pulsed, dimming and brightening with the impassable rhythm of the thrum. Each pulse seemed to stretch the seconds, making time elastic. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat trying to match the world's strange new pulse. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, sharp and coppery. I stumbled back, tripping over a discarded textbook. The impact sent a jolt up my spine. My vision swam. For a moment, the room tilted, the floor shifting beneath my feet as if the building were a boat caught in a violent swell. I clutched at the wall, my grip tight against the cool plaster. This wasn't just my mind playing tricks, this was real. The gravitational field, stable and unwavering my entire life, was wavering. I scrambled to my desk, fumbling for the console. The screens were alive, a chaotic symphony of data I couldn't comprehend. It was a roar, not a sound I heard with my ears, but a pressure in my skull, an undeniable presence overwhelming the instruments. The anomaly readings, once subtle, were spiking off the charts. Gravitational fluxes, atmospheric density shifts, localized time dilation, all the theoretical impossibilities were now concrete, undeniable metrics. The entity wasn't just transmitting, it wasn't just observing, it was here, or rather, it was entering. The correction wasn't a future event, a distant threat. It was unfolding around me right now in the mundane landscape of the county fair setup, opening tomorrow, no workers present. Reality itself was being unstitched, thread by invisible thread. My stomach lurched, nausea twisting through me. The air grew impassably heavy, crushing. Outside, the canvas tents of the fairground billowed, then seemed to deflate, collapsing inward as if losing all substance. It wasn't just swaying anymore, its structure rippled, a visual distortion that made my eyes ache. The moon, a distorted smear in the sky, seemed to swell, then contract, like a diseased organ. What did it mean to have existence corrected? Was this the beginning of the unraveling, the pre-dawn of oblivion? My head swam. The pressure behind my eyes became excruciating. The world outside the window was no longer just distorted, it was wrong. The very ground seemed to breathe. Could I even call this a world any longer?